midnight. October 25th, 1944. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura knew American warships were waiting at the northern end of Surigao Strait. His intelligence had told him. He passed the reports to his fleet. He did not alter course. He led his column north at 18 knots into absolute darkness. No moon. Stars providing no useful light. 7 ships, 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, 4 destroyers. 46 minutes after the first torpedo hit, 4,000 Japanese sailors were dead. This is the story of the last battleship engagement in the history of naval warfare, why Nishimura sailed into a trap he already knew was there, and what the men waiting for him at the northern end of that strait had built in the 24 hours before he arrived. This is no man's land. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. New documentaries drop every single week. To understand why 4,000 Japanese sailors died in 46 minutes in a strait in the Philippines, you have to understand the strategic crisis that produced the battle and the desperate plan that Japan's naval command had constructed to address it. By October of 1944, the strategic situation facing the Imperial Japanese Navy was as close to hopeless as it was possible to be, without being formally acknowledged as hopeless. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June had destroyed the last functioning Japanese carrier air groups. The Mariana Islands had fallen, bringing American B-29s within range of the Japanese home islands. American submarines had reduced Japanese merchant shipping to a fraction of its pre-war capacity, strangling the oil supply that kept the fleet operational. And now American forces were landing on Leyte in the Philippines, threatening to cut the supply line between Japan and the Dutch East Indies oil fields entirely. Without Philippine oil access, the Japanese fleet would be immobilized within months, regardless of how many ships remained afloat. Sho-Go, Operation Victory, was Japan's response to the Leyte landings and to the strategic crisis they represented. It was not a plan designed to win the battle in any conventional sense. It was a plan designed to destroy the American landing fleet at Leyte, even at the cost of the Japanese naval forces conducting the attack, on the theory that destroying the invasion force would buy enough time for Japan to find some path to a negotiated peace before the home islands were invaded. The plan required 3 separate Japanese naval forces to converge on Leyte Gulf from different directions simultaneously. Nishimura's southern force was assigned to approach through Surigao Strait from the south and arrive at Leyte Gulf at dawn, where it would coordinate with the main center force arriving from the west. The problem with this plan was not its conception, it was its execution. And the execution began to fail the moment American intelligence discovered that Shogo existed. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf had 24 hours to arrange every weapon available to him in the waters of Surigao Strait before Nishimura arrived, and what he built in those 24 hours was the most comprehensive naval ambush of the entire Pacific War. Oldendorf had been given command of the bombardment and fire support ships assigned to protect the Leyte landing area. His force was not designed for offensive naval warfare. It consisted primarily of older battleships, most of them survivors of Pearl Harbor that had been repaired and returned to service. The West Virginia, the Maryland, the Mississippi, the Tennessee, the California, the Pennsylvania, supplemented by cruisers and destroyers. The battleships were slow, heavily armored, designed to absorb punishment and deliver fire support, rather than to maneuver rapidly in fleet engagements. Against the 2 Japanese battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, whose crews were experienced and whose guns were formidable, a straightforward surface engagement was not certain to produce the result Oldendorf needed. So he did not design a straightforward surface engagement. He designed a gauntlet. The southern entrance to Surigao Strait was covered by 39 PT boats, spread in 3 groups, whose job was not to destroy the Japanese force but to harass it, to report its position, and to force it to maneuver and fire on small targets rather than proceeding at maximum speed. Inside the strait, 2 destroyer squadrons were positioned on either flank to conduct torpedo attacks as the Japanese column passed through. At the northern end of the strait, Oldendorf positioned his 6 battleships in a line across the full width of the navigable water, with cruisers on either side extending the line outward. This was the crossing of the T, the classic naval tactical maneuver in which a line of ships positioned perpendicular to an enemy column can bring all its guns to bear on the lead ships of the column, while the trailing ships cannot fire without hitting their own vessels ahead of them. In 24 hours, with what he had available, Oldendorf had built a perfect killing machine. The question was whether Nishimura would sail into it. The question of why Nishimura sailed his force into a strait he knew was defended against an ambush he had been warned about has occupied naval historians for more than 80 years and has not produced a fully satisfying answer. The documents that might have explained his reasoning in detail did not survive the battle, because Nishimura died with his flagship Yamashiro at the northern end of the strait. What historians have been able to reconstruct from the records that did survive, from the accounts of the handful of Japanese officers who lived through the engagement, and from the operational context of the Sho-Go plan, suggests that Nishimura's decision was not irrational, even if its outcome was catastrophic. His orders from Combined Fleet Headquarters were explicit. He was to be at Leyte Gulf by dawn on October 25th. The Shogo plan required simultaneous arrival of Japanese forces from multiple directions to overwhelm American defenses before they could be concentrated against any single threat. If Nishimura turned back or delayed, sent a force under Admiral Kurita, which was fighting its way through the Sibuyan Sea against American air attack and losing ships in the process, would arrive at Leyte Gulf alone and face the full weight of American naval power without the diversionary presence of the Southern force. The plan was already failing. Turning back would not save it. Continuing might. Beyond the operational logic, there was the institutional dimension that shaped every decision made by Japanese naval officers in the final year of the war. Nishimura had been given an order. The order required him to be at Leyte Gulf at dawn. Japanese naval culture did not have a well-developed mechanism for a flag officer to decide that his orders were no longer achievable and alter course based on his own assessment of the situation. The culture that had produced the decisions at Midway, that had kept the Yamato in port rather than deploying it effectively, that had suppressed the intelligence reports coming back from the Pacific and managed bad news rather than acting on it. That culture was present on the bridge of the Yamashiro on the night of October 24th and 25th. Nishimura kept going because the order said to keep going. The first contact between American and Japanese forces in the Battle of Surigao Strait came shortly after 10 in the evening on October 24th, when the lead elements of Nishimura's southern force entered the southern approaches to the strait and encountered the first group of American PT boats. The PT boat attack on a major surface force was never going to be decisive in a conventional military sense. The boats were small, fast, and armed with torpedoes, but they were also vulnerable to any caliber of naval gunfire, and their torpedoes required close-range launching that was extremely difficult to achieve against an alerted enemy that was actively maneuvering and firing. What the PT boats accomplished at Surigao Strait was not destruction, but information. Every PT boat contact with the Japanese force was a position report transmitted to Oldendorf at the northern end of the strait. Every evasive maneuver the Japanese ships made to avoid the PT boat attacks was time spent not closing the distance to Leyte Gulf. Every gun fired at the small American boats was ammunition expended against targets that could not affect the outcome of the operation. And every minute the Japanese force spent firing at PT boats was a minute that Oldendorf's radar operators spent tracking the exact position, speed, and heading of every ship in the Japanese column. By the time Nishimura's force had passed through the gauntlet of PT boats and entered the strait proper, Oldendorf knew more about the disposition of Japanese ships than Nishimura knew about the American force waiting for him ahead. The PT boats had cost the Japanese nothing they could not afford to lose in terms of ships. They had cost them the one thing they could not replace in the tactical situation they were in: surprise. By midnight, as Nishimura's column moved north through the strait at 18 knots, Oldendorf had been tracking it for 2 hours and had already begun positioning his destroyer squadrons for the torpedo attack that was coming next. Stop and consider what radar meant in the waters of Surigao Strait on the night of October 24th. Nishimura's force was navigating in absolute darkness, no moon, overcast conditions limiting starlight. The strait is roughly 25 miles long and between 12 and 20 miles wide at various points, narrowing at the northern end, where Oldendorf had positioned his battle line. Japanese naval gunnery at night relied on optical rangefinders, searchlights, and star shells, illumination rounds fired to briefly light up the target area. All of these methods required the Japanese gunners to be able to see their targets in some meaningful sense. American radar fire control systems required no such thing. The SG surface search radar installed on American cruisers and battleships in 1944 could track a target the size of a battleship at ranges of more than 15 miles with sufficient precision to generate accurate fire control solutions. The radar operators on Oldendorf's ships were tracking Nishimura's column continuously from the moment it entered effective radar range. They knew the speed of each ship, its heading, its distance, its bearing. They could generate firing solutions that would put shells on target before the Japanese crews knew a shell was incoming. Nishimura's ships had radar too, but Japanese naval radar in 1944 was substantially less capable than American radar in both range and resolution. And the Japanese had not integrated their radar as thoroughly into their fire control systems as the Americans had. What this meant in practice was that Oldendorf's battle line could engage at ranges where Japanese optical gunnery was effectively blind. The crossing of the T that Oldendorf had arranged was not just a tactical geometrical advantage, it was a technological ambush inside a tactical ambush. Nishimura was sailing toward guns that could see him when he could not see them, arranged in a formation that maximized the number of those guns that could fire at him simultaneously, while minimizing the number of his own guns that could fire back. At approximately 2:30 in the morning on October 25th, with Nishimura's column moving north through the strait, tracked precisely by American radar, Oldendorf ordered his destroyer squadrons to execute their torpedo attacks from both flanks simultaneously. The destroyer attack at Surigao Strait was one of the most successful torpedo operations in the entire Pacific War, and its success was not accidental. The destroyers had been positioned on both sides of the strait in darkness, while the PT boats were keeping Nishimura's attention and his gunfire focused toward the south. They had received continuous tracking data from the radar picket ships at the northern end of the strait. They knew exactly where the Japanese column was, at what speed it was moving, and what angle of approach would give them the best torpedo firing solution. The destroyers launched their torpedoes from ranges and angles carefully calculated to maximize the probability of hits on the lead ships of the Japanese column. The physics of a torpedo attack on a column of ships moving at a predictable speed along a predictable course favored the attacker in ways that daylight surface engagements did not. Nishimura could maneuver to complicate the torpedo geometry, but maneuvering would slow his advance and risk collisions in the darkness. And every minute he spent maneuvering was another minute that Oldendorf's battle line was drawing him closer. The torpedoes struck the Japanese column with devastating effect. The battleship Fuso was hit by multiple torpedoes and broke in two, both halves burning as they drifted south through the strait. Several Japanese destroyers were sunk or disabled. The Yamashiro was hit and damaged, but continued north, trailing fires, slowed but still moving. Nishimura, on the bridge of his damaged flagship, ordered the remnants of his force to continue toward Leyte Gulf. At the northern end of the strait, the battle line waited. At 3:53 in the morning, with the Yamashiro and the surviving Japanese ships approaching the northern end of Surigao Strait, Oldendorf gave the order to open fire. 6 battleships, all in line, all tracking the same targets on radar, all with fire control solutions already computed and verified. The cruisers on either flank opened simultaneously. The result was a concentration of firepower that had no precedent in the Pacific War, and that the crew of the Yamashiro, approaching from the south in a damaged ship trailing fire, had no practical ability to counter. The crossing of the T is a naval tactical concept that dates to the age of sail. A line of ships positioned perpendicular to an advancing enemy column can bring all its guns to bear on the lead ships of the column. The ships at the rear of the column cannot fire forward without hitting their own vessels. The lead ships of the column, which are the ones receiving the fire, can only bring their forward guns to bear on the line because their own trailing ships are in the way of their broadside fire. At Surigao Strait, Oldendorf's line could bring the full broadside of 6 battleships and their screening cruisers against the Yamashiro. The Yamashiro could effectively respond with her forward turrets only. The disparity in weight of fire was not marginal. It was overwhelming. The Yamashiro was tracked for 36 minutes before the first shell hit her. The tracking was by radar, in darkness, at ranges where Japanese optical gunnery was useless. The first salvos from the American battle line walked onto the target with a precision that survivors on the Japanese ships described as incomprehensible. Shells arriving from the darkness ahead at ranges they could not measure and from a source they could not see. In 20 minutes of continuous fire, the Yamashiro was destroyed. She capsized at 4:19 in the morning. Nishimura went down with her. The Battle of Surigao Strait lasted from the first torpedo hit to the last Japanese resistance for approximately 46 minutes of concentrated action at the northern end of the strait, though the full engagement from first PT boat contact to final pursuit extended across several hours of the night. In those 46 minutes, Japan lost 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, and 3 destroyers. 1 Japanese destroyer escaped. The casualties among the Japanese crews were approximately 4,000 men, a number that represents nearly the complete complement of the ships that were sunk. The survivors were few, and the reasons were practical rather than deliberate. Men in the water in the Surigao Strait in the early hours of October 25, 1944, were in warm Philippine waters, far from any shore, and in the middle of an active naval engagement. The American forces were occupied with the tactical situation rather than rescue operations. The darkness that had been Nishimura's theoretical ally was his crew's enemy when they were in the water. The strategic result of the Battle of Surigao Strait was the elimination of Japan's southern force as a functioning naval unit, which meant that the Sho-Go plan was already half-failed before sunrise on October 25th. Kurita's center force would arrive at Leyte Gulf without the coordinating southern force it needed, and the battle off Samar that followed, where Kurita's battleships and cruisers encountered a small force of American escort carriers and destroyers and failed to destroy them despite overwhelming material superiority, was in part a product of the confusion and disorganization that resulted from the plan's partial failure. The last battleship versus battleship engagement in naval history ended not with any heroic last stand or tactical innovation, but with the systematic destruction of a force that sailed into a prepared killing ground because its orders required it to be somewhere at dawn, and its commander saw no alternative to following those orders regardless of what lay ahead. The Battle of Surigao Strait is not remembered with the same prominence as Midway or Leyte Gulf as a whole, despite being one of the most tactically complete naval victories in American history, and despite being the last occasion in human history when battleships engaged each other in surface combat. The reasons for its relative obscurity are partly the consequence of being one engagement within the much larger Battle of Leyte Gulf, and partly the consequence of being a one-sided engagement rather than a dramatic contest. One-sided battles make for less compelling historical narratives than close-run things, and Surigao Strait was not a close-run thing at the tactical level. The outcome was determined before the first shell was fired, by Oldendorf's preparation and by the technological gap that American radar represented. What Surigao Strait matters for, beyond the immediate tactical result, is what it reveals about how wars are actually won and lost at the operational level. Nishimura's force was not destroyed by superior seamanship or by individual heroism, though the destroyer crews who launched their torpedo attacks in the darkness performed their tasks with genuine professional skill. It was destroyed by information, by the 24 hours of preparation that Oldendorf used to position every weapon he had in the geometry that maximized their effect, by the PT boats that harassed and tracked and reported, by the radar systems that turned the darkness from Nishimura's potential ally into an irrelevant variable, by the fire control computers on the American battle line that could calculate a firing solution on a ship they could not see and put shells on target across 10 miles of dark water with sufficient precision to sink it in 20 minutes. Nishimura knew the trap was there. He sailed into it anyway because his orders required him to be somewhere at dawn. and because the institutional culture that produced those orders had not built into itself a mechanism for acknowledging that the orders were no longer executable. 4,000 men paid for that failure of institutional design. 4,000 Japanese sailors died in 46 minutes in Surigao Strait. They died in a trap they had been warned about, sailing under orders that required them to be somewhere at dawn regardless of what stood between them and that destination. The admiral who led them knew the Americans were waiting. He passed the intelligence to his fleet. He did not alter course. The last battleship engagement in naval history ended not with any dramatic uncertainty, but with a systematic destruction that was complete before sunrise. If this video meant something to you, hit the like button right now. It is the single best way to push this story to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you are not already here. Drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and whether anyone in your family served in the Pacific. We will see you in the next one.